Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the What Are Soft Skills webinar. We do still have some people logging in, so we will give them another minute just so that they can get logged into the webinar with us, and then we will go ahead and get started. If you have questions that you want to ask or comments that you want to make at any point, if you look in the upper right-hand side of your screen, your computer screen, you should see an orange box with a white arrow in it. If you click on that, it will open a drop-down menu, and there should be a chat or a question box in there, and you're welcome to type in your questions or any comments that you have at any time. Our presenter will stop several times today, and we will go ahead and take a look at any of the questions or comments that have come in. Okay, well, it looks like we have just about everybody logged in, so let's go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. I'm Kim Brown. I'm with the Montana Pre-ETS Technical Assistance Center, and I'll be your moderator for today. This webinar is sponsored by the Montana Pre-Employment Transition Services Technical Assistance Center and is funded in whole or in part under a contract with the Montana Department of Public Health and Human Services. The statements shared in the presentation today do not necessarily reflect the opinion of the department. All attendees are currently muted. This helps to cut down on background noise so that the other audience members can hear the presenter. So if you do want to ask the presenter a question or make a comment, please type your question or comment into the chat box. Sometimes that's called the question box. And again, if you can't see that on your screen, look to the upper right-hand area of your screen, and there should be an orange box with a white arrow in it. If you click on that, a drop-down menu will open, and the question or chat box should be there. Please note that when you type in a question, only the moderator and the presenter and you will be able to see what you've typed into that box. So if it's a question for the entire audience to hear, I will read that aloud for the presenter during the question and answer time. And we will have several question and answer periods during today's webinar. For those of you who requested Montana Office of Public Instruction renewal units when you registered, those will be emailed to you after the webinar, and it can take a week or two to get those sent out. Please note that you do have to have pre-registered and requested the OPI credit in order to receive it, and unfortunately we're currently unable to issue other kinds of attendance documentation. The session today is being audio taped for our Pre-ETS resource library, and the recording for today's webinar will be posted to the Montana Vocational Rehabilitation and Blind Services YouTube channel. I'll put the URL or website address for that YouTube channel in the chat box later on in the presentation. It's quite a long URL. We are trying to get a bit shorter one that will be easier for people to remember and click on. But again, I will put the current URL into the chat box for you later on in case you have other people you want to share today's webinar with, or if you want to listen in to any of the webinars that we've done earlier this year. As we end the webinar today, a quick survey will pop up. It has 8 or 9 questions, and we do ask that you please take the time to answer those questions, especially right now as we're trying to plan future webinars. It's really helpful if we get feedback on what you need to know, what you want to know, what kinds of information would be helpful to you, and also whether the delivery of, whether the format that we use for the webinars is working. So please do take the time to fill out that survey. And with that, I would like to go ahead and introduce and thank our speaker today. We're very lucky to have with us Mary DiBiase. Mary currently works as a program coordinator for Montana Youth in Transitions, as well as for the Rural Institute Pre-ETS TAC. She's also worked as a special educator in Montana for 9 years and as a job training program supervisor for the Montana Department of Labor Workforce Services Division. Mary has experience with curriculum development and training for parents, youth with disabilities, educators, and counselors regarding transition services in Montana and how to teach employment readiness skills to youth. She holds a BA in psychology from Carroll College and a BA in special education and master's in education from the University of Great Falls. And with that, I will turn it over to you, Mary. Are you there, Mary?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now I can hear you. There's a bit of a buzz.
Okay.
That's not the
Well,
truth.
it was working really well. Is it better?
There's still a bit of a buzz. I'm not sure what that is. It might go away as I turn down my speakers, and if you have speakers, if you turn down those as well.
Okay.
There, that sounds nice.
Okay. Is
Perfect.
that better?
Yes, that's great. Thanks, Mary.
Okay, sorry about that. And thank you for the introduction, Kim. As Kim mentioned, I'm going to talk about soft skills and teaching soft skills specifically to youth and to new workers. A lot of what we're going to talk about and a lot of what is in various soft skill curriculum is applicable to all workers, but in teaching soft skills to youth, I think there's a specific set of skills and a specific approach that we want to use. Okay. So, Kim, now it's not advancing.
Just
Everything
give
was
it
looking
another
really well.
click. Sometimes it takes a second click to advance it.
Okay, my apologies. There we go. So as Kim mentioned, I wear two hats, but one of them is with the Montana Youth in Transition Project, and the soft skills curriculum is one of the projects that Montana Youth Transitions has designated as one of their missions and one of the things we want to offer. We developed a curriculum that is youth focused to teach soft skills, and through the project we offer training on how to teach soft skills to youth. We have a Train the Trainer seminar that we offer, and we go anywhere in the state, and that essentially helps folks that are teaching anyone that's new to the workforce, but specifically youth, how to use the curriculum and the resources that we have available. Another thing that we do is we come into high schools and work with youth in academies and offer ourselves as one of the trainers for youth. Another project that we have, and the reason I'm pointing it out is where you can access the curriculum and resources that we have for soft skills, is our website that you will find at montanayouth.transitions.org. And on the right-hand side of the website, on the top navigational bar, there's a drop-down menu that has our soft skills information. I also want to point out this website as a transition resource, really for anyone interested in transition. So this is for youth, for parents, and for professionals. And there's just a plethora of resources that have anything to do with transition, including independent living, health, recreation, and employment. And as Kim mentioned, I'm going to stop a couple of times throughout the presentation to see if there's any questions. So please ask questions as we go, and when we stop, we'll just read whatever questions come up. So you don't have to wait until the end to ask any questions. Just ask as you think of them, and we'll stop a few times.
I'm sorry to interrupt, Mary, but the buzz has come back. I'm not sure if your speakers are back on or...
I haven't changed anything.
Okay.
But
all right. Well, it's background enough. If it's really bothersome to any of the audience members, please let us know. But otherwise, you can still be heard quite easily, Mary. So sorry to
okay,
interrupt.
I apologize for that. Yeah, let us know if it's something I need to try to find a different location or something in the office. So, all right, so talking about soft skills, essentially what we're talking about are people skills. And I'm going to go into a little bit of a background of what soft skills and hard skills are so you have a good understanding of what we're discussing here. But soft skills essentially are how we get along with other people and how we navigate the social world. And when we think about employment and different jobs, we think about the tasks that we do at work, and we don't necessarily think about how we get along with folks in the work environment, how we get along with our employers, how we get along with our customers, and how much effect that has on our employability. But when we talk about soft skills, essentially what we're talking about are customer service skills, which is a very broad topic, and we're going to break that down a little bit later. How friendly we are, how much of a team player we are, and a big piece of this, of all of the lessons of communication, or of soft skills, are communication skills. For some folks, these are natural and inherent skills. We automatically know when we see somebody's facial expressions what they're telling us. We know how to talk to people when they come in and gauge our response based on their mood or what they're asking for. But for others, it's not necessarily a natural and inherent skill, and they might need to be explicitly taught these specific skills and have opportunities to practice these skills. Soft skills are skills that until recently we've taken for granted that new workers will have when they start working. They are oftentimes skills that employers don't expect to have to train their employees on. And as I said, recently we see a lot more articles about employers asking for workers with soft skills, or we see more articles about folks not having the right people skills when they go into a new job. And a lot of times it ends up causing problems for them when they're working. So there's a lot of reasons why we're talking about these skills, but when we're talking about soft skills, just remember we're talking about the people skills and the communication skills. So the opposite of soft is hard. So when we talk about hard skills, we're talking about the technical skills that a person has to have when they go to work. Typically, these are the skills that we might receive training for before we start a job. If we're going to college, these are the skills that are taught to us. If we go to employer-sponsored trainings, these are the skills that are taught to us. Employers even often offer regular continuing education, or might send employees to classes to add to their credentials and increase their expertise. But typically the classes that we have available to us through employment are teaching us the hard skills. So when we look at a specific job, and I have a picture on the screen of a gal that seems to be in front of a large grocery store. So I would say she's working as a customer service clerk or grocery store clerk. So the soft skills that we would expect that she needs to have are the customer service skills, such as she needs to be have a friendly face, be friendly in the way she addresses her customers or other coworkers. Ask folks if they found everything that they need. Ask them what kind of bag they need to have their groceries put into. Maybe if it's appropriate, how to offer small talk. How are you today? Be able to evaluate needs of the customers. So if you have a more frail appearing elderly person, maybe you don't make their bags very heavy. Other folks that don't want to carry very many bags, you put as much in as you can, but those are things that we don't teach. We just expect that people can gauge that by their experience from interacting with other folks. The hard skills we would expect this person to have, they need to correctly operate the cash register when they're dealing with produce, what the codes are or where to find them, how to properly break the groceries, knowing that you don't put the bread underneath the canned goods, that kind of thing. So when we're looking at job descriptions and we're helping youth and younger workers get ready for employment, we need to be looking at all of the skills necessary for that job, not just the hard skills. So why are soft skills so important? And we're going to talk a lot about this in a lot of different ways. But I have found as a teacher and as a person that does soft skills training, when I'm working with youth or new workers, I think it's vital that we make the importance of soft skills relevant to them. And one of the things that I try to do is make sure this isn't just a feel-good topic, that we're just teaching it as this is something you need to do to help your employability. But what does that actually mean? And what it means for a lot of folks is it has economic consequences. We're going to look at some employer surveys, and there's a plethora of those as well. But the employer surveys overwhelmingly tell us that it is important to employers that people have the necessary soft skills before they walk into a job. And if they don't, that's a primary reason for people losing their job. But we'll look at some of those specific instances as well. And another thing that makes it relevant is just when you're when you're working, how are you getting along with other employees? How is your relationship with your employer? And that also creates job satisfaction or job dissatisfaction. Okay, so one of the employer surveys that I mentioned is this one right here, and it was done by Leadership IQ, and they surveyed 5,247 hiring managers, so the people responsible for hiring and sometimes letting go employees if necessary. And those folks said the primary reason for new hires not working out, which means they got fired or they didn't make it through their probationary period, overwhelmingly come to the lack of soft skills or not using soft skills appropriately. And I know that the writing on this slide is a little bit difficult to read, but I'm going to read the 5 categories that the responses have been categorized in. And the top one is coachability. So how they took feedback, how they managed their relationship with employers or supervisors. 26% of folks were let go because of problems with coachability. And I would categorize coachability as a soft skill. The second area is emotional intelligence. Anybody that's looked at EQ versus IQ knows that EQ has to do with how well we are able to work with a variety of people, how well we can gauge other people's personalities and adjust our own to make an appropriate interaction using effective verbal and nonverbal communication, etc. And 23% of folks were let go because of a lack of EQ, which also would be a soft skill. Motivation, 17% were let go because of problems with motivation, and here we would categorize that as a work ethic. How well we work without supervision, if we're getting tasks done without being prompted, that kind of thing. And that also would be a soft skill. Temperament, 15% of folks had problems with employment due to temperament, and this would include our attitudes, positive or negative, matching our personality and behavior to the work environment, how well we respond to conflict, all of those kinds of things. Another soft skill. And the last category is technical competence. 11% of folks lost their jobs because of how well they performed the hard skills. So when you take a look at this survey, and pretty much if you Google this topic, all of the surveys that you're going to come up with match these statistics very closely. So 11% of folks lost their job because of how well they did their job. 89% of the folks lost their job because of their lack of soft skills. So another way to talk about this with folks that are new to the workforce is here is the reality, the economic reality of why we need to be better at these skills. And there isn't any of us that aren't continually trying to improve this because it's not something we ever master. But if we have a good basis of it and we have the ability to know who to go to for help when we're struggling with conflicts with coworkers or managing our personal life or whatever the case may be, then our success rate is going to go up. Okay, so another topic, if you Google it, and if you're looking at soft skill as an employer need or an employment need, there are a plethora of articles out there talking about how employers really expect folks to have soft skills when they come into the workforce. And when a society for human resource management, which is the National Organization for Human Resource Managers, write articles like this saying we really are having a hard time hiring folks that have the necessary soft skills. They might be a great worker in terms of their technical skills, but that's not what's affecting us in the workplace. We can train people in the skills that we need them to have for how to do their job. It is much more difficult to train people on the personality and the people skills and the communication skills. It's time intensive. It often includes sensitive topics that a lot of employers just aren't comfortable discussing. And it also may include employee disputes that puts the employer in a legal bind, and they really can't discuss a lot, or they maybe don't feel comfortable going there. So this is a need and something that's said over and over by the employment community that new employees need to have. So when we're working with youth, hopefully we are making an attempt to start the process of teaching these skills before they leave high school and before they enter the employment community, so that gives them that much more of a leg up. Okay, one more little bit of background before we go into the meat of the soft skills are articles like this. This was an article put out by the U.S. Department of Labor, and every year or two they do a big study of labor market. What this study indicates is when we look at the employment rate, so how many people are working in our country, an employment rate is typically surveyed by the entire population. 17.1% of the disabled community are working. 64.6% of the non-disabled community are working. When you look at statistics like that, you also need to ask the question, are our youth with disabilities in the classes that teach these types of skills as well? Are they getting instruction on soft skills, and are they getting opportunities to work on employment-based learning opportunities? Contrarily, looking at the unemployment rate, so this is typically surveyed by the Department of Labor based on employment records and on unemployment benefit recipients. The unemployment rate for the population without disabilities, and this was in 2014, was 5.9%. The unemployment rate for folks with disabilities was 12.5%. So all of the Montana Youth in Transition projects are geared towards working with youth with disabilities who are transitioning into adulthood, and when you look at studies like this, you can see why our push for developing a soft skills curriculum was so important. The other thing I want to mention before I move past this slide is when we're looking at employment skills as kind of a moving target for our youth that are still in school, and this is something that I wish I would have done from the get-go as a teacher, but it just started to slowly dawn on me as I was teaching that I needed to start doing this. But I started using employment skills as my moving target for where I wanted my students to be when they left high school. So when I look at accommodations that I provide to students, or that students have provided to them in school, I should say, are those accommodations necessary for them now, so you put them into place, but how well will those accommodations translate to the work environment, and do you need to keep perfecting a student's coping mechanism and ability to navigate the workplace? And I'm going to give it a specific example. I'm thinking of students that I had that had emotional disabilities. What's one of the most common accommodations we provide for students with emotional disabilities, and that's having a quiet place, a place that you can take a time out and reset themselves and then come back to the larger population of the school, which is a great accommodation, and it is certainly appropriate when you have a developing individual. But if we leave it at that and we don't keep working on the time that it takes to come back to the larger population, or what some other accommodations might be to be helpful, then we are setting up possibly that student for failure when they enter the workforce. That accommodation isn't necessarily going to translate well, especially if they take a long time to come back into the general population. And again, that's only one example, but it's something to keep in mind when we're working with all of our students, that we don't use those as excuses to not be teaching all students these skills. If we say, well, this student has this particular issue in school, therefore they're not going to be able to enter the workforce. Well, what skills do we need to have, and what can we do that's appropriate for them to work toward? Okay. Before I go on, are there any questions about anything that we've covered so far? And Kim, can you tell me if there are any questions, and if not, then I'll move on.
We don't have a question in yet, but we do have a comment, Mary.
Sure.
What sounds like a pretty cool suggestion. I think I will use some of the information on these slides to create posters for my classroom.
Oh, okay, great. Yes, and in addition to the slides that we have, these slides, I should say, are a snippet of what the curriculum offers that is on the website. And so if you go to montanayouth-transitions.org, you will have the ability to request the password to access the curriculum, which is free to anyone, and that lets you have access to the facilitator's manual, the student workbooks, PowerPoint slides if they're applicable to the various chapters, as well as the other resources that are there currently and will be there, will be updated, because I do update the curriculum periodically. So feel free to use any of the material that's appropriate for who you are working with.
And a comment also, Mary's slides for today are available to you all as downloads. Again, on the right-hand side of your screen where you see the orange box with the white arrow in it, if you click on that, it should say handouts, and there's a PDF version of Mary's PowerPoint for today if you're interested in saving that. And that's the only question or comment that's come in so far, Mary.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and move on then, and we're going to talk about some categories of soft skills, and I'm going to cover a few of those categories a little bit more in depth. We're not going to have time to go through all of them when I do the Train the Trainer sessions on how to teach this curriculum. It takes me 4 hours, so I've sort of crammed 4 hours worth of content into a little less than an hour and a half. So I apologize that all of the topics that you see in front of you right now won't be covered, but as I said, we do offer the opportunity to do trainings around the state, so if your community is interested in that, also access the curriculum. If you have any questions, my contact information is in there, and please let me know if I can be helpful. So some of the categories of soft skills include things like application and interviewing skills, and you don't necessarily think of written items as including soft skills, but we're going to talk about that a little bit more and how that applies. How we use our manners and what manners we use. Communication skills, this is verbal and nonverbal, and when I do academies with youth, I spend a lot of time on communication skills. I believe this is the bedrock for almost all of the other soft skill chapters and lessons. Individual and team work ethics, effective team participation and how to do that well, professionalism, personal organizational skills. This is a broad topic that includes a lot of different things. conflict management. And this is a lot of how we manage ourselves in those conflicts, not necessarily how we manage others, which applies to our attitudes. And also we cover technology in the workplace, and we'll talk more about how that applies as a soft skill. Some folks believe that or feel that opportunities for learning soft skills are more appropriate when you just put students into work-based learning opportunities and to work experiences, so that kids get hands-on opportunities to interact with other people and how to do that well, or learn from those experiences. And I think this is definitely a key component. We need to have students have those opportunities to have that experience in a workplace, experience different kinds of jobs, working with a variety of different people, and so on. But my experience with students is that, and for especially students that struggle socially or have an emotional disability or might have Asperger's or autism, they really benefit from pre-teaching any social skill. And so my feeling has always been that if we have a class like this where we're really allowing students to get some feedback about what's important when we work with other people, what kinds of things we need to take into consideration, and also practice those skills and pair that with real-world opportunities, then students will have a more rich learning environment. Then they can come back and say, you know, when you talked about nonverbal communication and reading somebody's facial expressions, I really struggled with this today. You know, how could I do that better? Pairing those two things, I think, is very important for the ultimate success. So our first category that we're going to talk about today is application and interviewing skills. These two items are our first, or can be our first impressions with employers. Applications especially, I think, are oftentimes, at least with my experience with teaching high school students, they wonder why I'm teaching this. Why am I going over something like this? It's just as basic as writing your name and writing a few details about yourself, and we're good to go. However, if we talk about social or communication skills, what we put on paper is one way of communicating with another person, and they don't have that nonverbal communication to pair with it. So how we fill out our application is going to make a huge impression on an employer. When you think of an employer, especially in a larger area that might have 50 or 60 applications for one opening, what's their first weed out process? Well, it's going to be how the application looks and what's on it. And so we need to be able to get across the point to students that this is a representation of you. How does it look? What words are you using to describe yourself and what work experience you have? Are you descriptive? Do you give detail, or are you short and curt? And I like to teach by bad example when I teach things like applications and interviewing. And by that I mean I put bad examples of these in front of a student and say, okay, you are the employer now. You look at this application and tell me if you would hire this person, and if not, why? So rather than, I don't think it's effective to give only great examples of what our materials should look like. I think we need to put examples that need some correction and have students really take that that information and process it and internalize it, and be able to explain what is wrong with it and what they would do differently. Interviewing is another preliminary impression we're giving to an employer, and there's a lot of soft skills that go into interviewing. How do we look? What kind of clothes are we wearing? Is our hair kept? Do we have good personal hygiene? Are we making eye contact? Are we answering questions with yes or no answers, or are we giving lots of descriptions? What's our tone of voice? And tone of voice is a soft skill. Even though it occurs verbally, there's no words there. We're talking about just the type of voice that we're using when we're using our words. And then the larger concept of body language. And again, I teach that with bad example. We do mock interviews, and we let students watch a couple of interviews, and they get to evaluate those interviews based on their experience if they were the employer, and would they hire those people and why. Okay, so when we talk about communication, we're talking about verbal communication and nonverbal communication. And as I said before, I spend a lot of time on this lesson because I really think it is important as a foundation for all of those other lessons. And when I teach the other lessons, I often use this conversation and this lesson as a reference point. And a big piece of that is the nonverbal communication. Anybody that's taken Communication 101 in college has heard that 70% of our communication comes from nonverbal indicators. 70%. So more than half of what we communicate is not the words that we say, but how we are saying them and what our body is saying. And this is helpful for students to remember as a reminder to check themselves in their body language. Are they making eye contact? What is their tone of voice? They might be saying the right words, but how are they saying them? And when we are discussing nonverbal communication, we need to practice effective nonverbal skills. So body language, when we talk about open body language, where our arms are and our legs are and how our posture is looking, our facial expressions, can we hide looks of anger or disgust or disappointment when it's not appropriate to show those expressions, but also can we read those expressions on other people? So this is not just the communication we are using, but how are other people using communication, and what can we do to, how can we respond appropriately to other people's verbal and nonverbal communication? Eye contact. Some people are more comfortable with eye contact than others. Some cultures have different approaches to eye contact than others, but just even having a basic sense of when to make eye contact and how long to hold it for is very helpful. And then obviously our verbal communication needs to include practicing effective words that we use for the right environment. How we talk to our friends socially might be completely different to how we talk to our customers when we're in the store, or how we talk to our supervisor when we're asking for vacation time, those kinds of things. Our next section talks about manners, and this seems like a very basic lesson, and it's definitely one that we've all been taught since we were old enough to remember being taught anything. So as we were taught to say please and thank you, and then our parents built on from there. But for anyone that teaches, we know this is a lesson that we teach and we reteach at almost every grade level. It is not something we can take for granted that students remember to use manners in all circumstances. And obviously the manners we use as older individuals than we use when we're toddlers are going to be different, but even when we're walking by somebody and they say hello, do we keep on walking by, or do we stop and say hello or make eye contact and smile in response? And again, how can this be made real to youth? Why is this important? And so what I do is bring in this as an opportunity to talk about performance appraisals. A lot of youth have no idea that they're going to be graded at work in a similar manner than they're graded at school. And we don't have A, B, C, D, and F grades, but we do have a document when we're employees that our employer uses to let us know how well we're doing, the good and the bad, the good things that we're doing and they want us to keep doing and building on, but also those things that we need to keep improving on, or maybe are kind of an issue that's going to get us into trouble. So all of a sudden manners also have an economic reward. If we have a good performance appraisal and the employer is happy with how we are managing our relationship with other people and how we're getting along in that work environment, then we get to keep our job. We're possibly considered for promotions or pay raises, or we might be put on probation or terminated if that's the case that they're building. So manners seems like a very basic one that we don't need to touch on, but I think it's very important to tie those more sophisticated manners especially to how it's going to affect us when we're at work. Okay, before we move on, are there any other questions, Kim?
Yes, Mary, we've had several come in. The first, when you're talking about teaching these different skills, are the students in classroom environments or are you teaching these in workshop situations?
So you can do that on an individual basis. You can really tailor this curriculum to meet the needs of whatever your circumstances are. There are teachers using this curriculum in a classroom environment where they teach a lesson or part of a lesson during a class period. Some of these lessons take more than one class period or might take several, especially if they do enrichment activities to help teach that lesson. And as I said, one of the things that my director, June Hermanson, and I do are our youth academies where we spend 4 hours with youth and we do a soft skills academy. We talk about 5 or 6 of these chapters. We can't do all 10 because the youth's eyes glaze over after a certain point, but it can be taught in that setting as well. And so really you can approach this to match whatever your situation is.
Okay, and the next question flows into something you just said. When do you do your academies?
We do them whenever they're requested from us. Our contact information will be at the end of this presentation, but it's also on the website. There's a flyer that you can download that talks about what an academy is and what a train-the-trainer is, and we respond to any community's needs. So if a community would like us to come in, just contact us and we'd be happy to visit with you about it.
Great. And then we have a comment in from Ellen Condon, who is the director of the Pre-Employment Transition Services Technical Assistance Center. And Ellen reminds us that teaching soft skills falls into workplace readiness as a Pre-ETS activity for schools who have Pre-ETS contracts with vocational rehabilitation. So schools can use their Pre-ETS dollars to hire Mary to do a soft skills academy for their youth or to build capacity in their school to teach soft skills to all high school students.
And that's a great reminder. Thank you, Ellen. And another thing to consider is if you have us come in and do a soft skills academy, it doesn't have to stop there. As I said, one of the things that we have on the website is a student workbook. And when we do the academies, we provide a workbook to every student. We don't have time to go through all of the lessons and all of the activities in that workbook, and so oftentimes what I do is give those workbooks to the teacher and tell them, or they may have participated in the class so they know what we've covered, and then they use that as a starting place to teach additional lessons and to complement what we've covered during that academy. So it doesn't have to stop at the workshop.
Great. And that's all that we have in so far, Mary.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and move into discussing technology in the workplace. And this is something that you don't find in soft skill curriculums very often. It's more of a recent topic, I think, just because everybody's catching up with the changes in technology that seem to occur on a weekly basis. But also we're navigating that whole process just within our school system, so we haven't translated that over to what it looks like in the workplace. But we felt it was very important to include a chapter on technology in the workplace because this is also an area that is getting workers, not just young workers, but workers of all ages, into trouble. And we want the youth that we're working with to have an advantage when they go into a workplace by knowing how to successfully navigate how to use technology in the workplace, but also how to use technology at home that might affect them in the workplace. So by this I mean email, how we send work-related emails. How do we word those? What soft skills do we use when we're wording them? We also talk about computer usage at work. What are the rules for using a work-owned computer and network? It can apply to phone usage, how to answer a work phone, when it's appropriate to use a work phone, and also your personal cell phone. How do you navigate that at work? When, where, and how do you use it appropriately? Or can you use it at all, and how do you know if you can? We also address social media, and this tends to be, this along with appropriate use of email tend to be what get people in trouble at work. And so I spend actually a lot of time talking about social media. Oftentimes social media is a personal use, and it's something we use in our personal lives, and it doesn't seem like it should affect us at work. But we aren't always good at keeping the lines drawn between personal life and work life. And so we talk a lot about how we use social media appropriately so that it doesn't affect our employment. So these are some of the things that we're going to talk about in technology in the workplace. But a lot of what it comes back to is, how can we use technology as an opportunity to now discuss having a dual identity? And by that I mean we have a personal life and we have a work life, and the two really should remain separate for us to be able to navigate it successfully, and so that it doesn't lead us into trouble at some point. And there's several examples I've put on this slide, and we'll talk about those a little bit. But one of the examples is even just how we word our email address. When I said that I use teaching by bad example as a technique when I cover applications, one of the email addresses I use on the application is the one that's listed here, lovetoparty@ whatever the email provider is .com. And see if students identify that as a problem or not. And it's interesting because about half of them see it as a problem, and they know instinctively if you have something that's worded like that, it's going to give a red flag to the employer saying, this person might not show up on Monday mornings or mornings at all, or they're not going to be regular employees, or they're going to have people coming into the workplace that aren't respectful of the workplace. I mean, whatever the preconceived notion might be, if you put this or a similar type email address on any kind of work-related document, it's setting yourself up to be judged. And how can we change that? And I give the example of myself. I have email addresses that are for my personal use, and I have email addresses that are for my work life, and I do not mix the two. And that's perfectly okay. You can have a dual identity. Social media, big topic. Bottom line is, never talk poorly about an employer, customers, or coworkers on a social venue. So when you're sending an email, or when you are commenting about something on Facebook or Twitter, work always should be either represented positively or not represented at all if you want to be successful. It can come back to bite you. And I give specific examples that are very easy to find with any Google search of folks that have gotten themselves into trouble and what happened. Tied into the curriculum in this chapter, I offer examples that I found that actually have pictures related to them of how folks have gotten themselves into trouble, either by making an inappropriate comment about an employer on Twitter, or something they've done publicly on Facebook that broke confidentiality. Or, I mean, there's just a ton of examples, and if you look in any newspaper or magazine, pretty much on a weekly basis, you're going to find examples of folks that have done that inappropriately. Also, what kind of image are we putting of ourselves on social media venues like Facebook? What kind of pictures do we post? If an employer that doesn't know us did a search of us on Facebook, what would their first impression be? A lot of youth don't realize that on one of the employer surveys that was done, 60% of employers have said they use social media searches as part of their hiring process. There's nothing illegal about that because we can Google anybody that we want to in a public forum. Then that's what search engines are, is a public forum. And so they commonly search us to see what can be seen of us, what kind of image we're putting out of ourselves. Now, Montana law, the last legislative session did put in a law that says an employer cannot ask you for a password or to be friended, but there's nothing wrong with them doing an anonymous search. So, given that light, how are we making those decisions about what we put on our accounts for social media, and also what are we putting as comments? And this picture that's on the slide, I don't always look for drama, but when I do, I go to Facebook. I don't think there's any of us that can't relate to that, whether we're talking about youth or adults. There's always people that are stirring up drama, but we have a choice of how we respond to that. And so we have a whole discussion about do we comment, or do we just ignore, or do we put people that like to stir up drama on mute, or do we even decide to unfriend them? And I think we need to be having those conversations with our youth to help make that decision or help them figure out how to make those decisions when they are on their social media on a daily basis. So our next section is regarding personal organization. And as I said before, this is a very broad topic, and it includes a lot of different things, and you know, there's always going to be things that you can add to the curriculum regarding this. But some of the main categories include our time management skills. Are we on time for work? Do we use our time well when we're at work? Do we attend on a regular basis? And if we don't, are we calling in or letting an employer know in a timely manner if we're not able to be at work? Anything that has to do with time management needs to be considered. How prepared are we for work? So if you are a carpenter, for example, do you come to work every day with the tools that you're expected to have, or are you searching through your car trying to find them or trying to remember where you put them last? How do we prioritize? Oh, there's a whole bunch of things we need to know how to prioritize. So how do we prioritize the jobs that we have at work? What do we consider to be most important, and what do we consider to be jobs that we can do when we have enough time to complete them? What would the boss expect us to prioritize? How do we identify our priorities versus what an employer expects our priorities to be? And then how can we manage our personal life as well as our work life? And what I mean by this is if we don't have our personal lives managed in a way, then it's going to affect our work life, and that's what we don't want to have happen either. So are our clothes ready before we go to work? Is our transportation figured out, and do we always have a plan B if plan A isn't going to work out, or if the battery's dead, or if the bus isn't on time, or whatever your transportation mode is? Family responsibilities, are they taken care of so that they're not going to carry over into your work day? And again, all of these can be relevant to youth if they are tied to the economic reality of having these things taken care of. But also what I try to do is really tie it to what that youth's career goal is. So instead of a general idea of saying you need to be prepared for whatever you're doing, okay, so if you want to be a carpenter, what does it mean to be prepared for that job? What tools do you have to be a carpenter? What do you need to have planned out before you know what the job is so you can order the right supplies? What is the customer going to expect? All of those kinds of things that make that career relevant to the youth. Or if you want to be a teacher, what does being prepared mean to a teacher? And I think if you have that direct connection to employment goals, it makes that whole idea of hearing people talk about being prepared much more relevant. Being the mother of a teenage daughter, I feel like I'm constantly harping on what it means to be prepared and how we do that. And I know pretty much all youth go through that process of hearing that from their parents and teachers because it's part of their development. So rather than being just another voice in that cacophony of voices saying you have to be prepared, well, how can we make it relevant? How can we make it meaningful? Okay, so when we talk about soft skill curriculum, I just wanted to put some resources that I have found to be helpful if in case they are for you. Again, our soft skills curriculum is on the montanayouth.transitions.org as well as any resources that we have available. The Department of Labor, the ODEP division under Department of Labor put together a curriculum called Skills to Pay the Bills. It's just another approach to the soft skills teaching techniques. They do cover some different types of topics, but the way their teaching style is just different than what my teaching style is, so you might want to look at that resource as well to see if there's anything that's helpful. 411 on disability disclosure. If you have students with disabilities in your classroom and you're working with them on how to approach disclosure and asking for accommodations, this workbook does a great job of really breaking that down, and it has some very interactive worksheets in it and that kind of thing. And teaching and assessing soft skills is a curriculum that was put out by a group in the UK actually, and it is more for adults, but they also did a great job of breaking down these skills and can be another valuable resource for you. If you are interested in learning more about the soft skills curriculum that we have available or any of the trainings that we do, here is our contact information for the Montana Youth in Transitions project. You can see what other projects are under My Transitions, as well as just using the website as a resource for yourself, you know, whatever is helpful for you. So with that, are there any other questions?
Mary, while we wait for people to type in their questions, we did have a couple of folks write in just to agree with and emphasize what you said about the importance of discussing technology and the appropriate use of it with students. They, in their comments, talked about how difficult it is for students even to decide what's appropriate technology to use at school and what are the right ways to use it at school. And so taking that a step further and looking at what is and isn't appropriate on the job is very important. So just a couple of folks agreeing with you wholeheartedly there.
And one thing I would add to that as well is, you know, when we talk about professionalism and work ethic, one of the things we talk about is when we're deciding how and when to use technology in the workplace appropriately, the bottom line question is, what is the employer paying us to do? Are they paying us to text our friends and to keep an eye on what's happening on our social media accounts, or are they paying us to do other jobs? And there are some jobs that do include a social media piece. My job includes a social media piece where I monitor a Facebook page. But can I be on that Facebook page for the 8 hours of the day, or do I check in on it, put something meaningful on it, respond to comments, and then move on to other things? And so when you look at technology, we're looking at our personal technology. We might be looking at the technology that we use for accommodations, and again, what is it the employer needs us to do, and is the technology being used to accommodate what the employer expectations are, or is it for something that doesn't necessarily need to be used for? So yes, I agree, all of those questions are important.
And I don't see any other questions coming in right now. Remember, folks, if you want to ask Mary a question while we have her here as a captive presenter, look in the upper right-hand section of your computer screen, and you should see an orange box with a white arrow in it. If you click on that, a box will open that allows you to type in any questions that you might have. And a PDF version of the PowerPoint from today is also available in that same drop-down area if you want to download the presentation and keep any of the slides for your later use. I don't see anything else coming in, Mary, so if you have other things you want to say, then when you're finished, I just have about 2 minutes of closing remarks for people, and then we'll have the survey.
Okay, I don't have anything else at this point. I would just say please check out the website and the curriculum and use what's helpful to you, and let me know if you have any other further questions.
Okay.
And thank you.
And Mary, if you wouldn't mind advancing to the next slide just for the information about the Pre-ETS Technical Assistance Center. We have the contact information for the Pre-ETS Technical Assistance Center on here. Ellen Condon is the project director, and we have the phone number and other address and email addresses there if you're interested in more information about what the Technical Assistance Center can offer for you. And also please remember Ellen's comment or reminder that Pre-ETS dollars, for those of you who are with schools that have contracts with VR for pre-employment transition services, can be used to bring Mary in to do these soft skills academies. And before I give our closing remarks, Mary, we did have a question come in. Do you have any suggestions for students with low motivation?
You know, I feel like students with low motivation really respond well to having opportunities to work on these soft skills in environments outside of their typical classroom, which can include having workshops like what we provide through the soft skills training, just because it's nice to hear from a different person that they don't know, and sometimes you get different feedback resulting from that. But also pairing those classes with opportunities to work in work-based learning opportunities that really are interesting to them. So what is the low motivation stemming from? Is it because they're just over school and they don't want to be involved in that anymore? And if so, what can we pair school with? And I would work really hard to see what interests that person and have some opportunities to try out different jobs, or even do job shadowing or helping out other students, or I mean whatever is a motivator for that student, or whatever is interesting to that student. So sometimes just getting out of our normal day-to-day routine can be helpful, if that makes any sense.
Okay. And the next question, if a teacher were to implement the full soft skills curriculum, about how long would it take?
So the curriculum at this point is 10 chapters. The chapters all are varying in length, but I would say you could easily do each chapter in 2 to 3 class periods. So I would say whatever you're looking at for time of class periods, that depends on the school, I realize, but I would say there's approximately 30 to 35 lessons within the curriculum at this point.
Okay. Well, with that, I just have a few closing remarks that folks will hang with us. A short survey will appear as you exit today's webinar. Please do take the time to answer those questions for us. We look through all of the responses and take those into account as we plan our future training opportunities. Our next pre-employment transition services webinar is called Helping Parents to Think About Employment for Everyone, and that will take place on July 14th from 10:30 until 12 o'clock Mountain Time. The registration information and flyer for that webinar goes out in approximately 2 weeks, so do be watching for that. If you're not already part of the Pre-Employment Transition Services online mailing list, send me a quick email and we'll get you signed up, because the flyer and registration information are sent to members of that online mailing list. When you registered for today's workshop, one of the registration questions was asking if you wanted to be added to that list. So if you've already marked yes there, or if you're already on the list, don't worry about emailing me. But if you're not part of the list and you didn't mark that you wanted to be added, let me know and we'll get you added to that mailing list. The recording for today's webinar will be posted on the Vocational Rehabilitation and Blind Services YouTube channel. That channel URL is on the PowerPoint slide in front of you right now, and it also should be in your chat box. And as I mentioned at the start of the webinar, we're hoping to get a shorter link for that so that you don't have to type in quite so many letters. You can also go to YouTube and do a search for Montana Vocational Rehabilitation, and it will take you to their channel as well, if that's an easier way to get there. We want to thank all of you who took time out of your day to join us for this presentation. We appreciate your interest in the topic, and we really want to know what other topics you think would be helpful in helping Montana students prepare for their transition from high school into the adult world. And Mary, we'd really like to thank you for your time and your expertise and for all of the information that you shared with us today. Fantastic job.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day, everyone.